Thank you, dear. I had a vision last night, and in my vision I saw that my brother said, who has been dead these 8 years, my dear brother, came to me and said, tomorrow we shall be together again. And so I know that this day, the 2nd of March, in the year of our Lord 672, is my last day on this earth. There now, that's got the horrible part over. It's not horrible, really. The young monks say that he has a plague, but bless them, they always say that about things they don't really understand. And it isn't a plague, it's a blessing, because my work on earth is over, and I would much sooner go now than linger on like some old blind sheepdog that no one's got the heart to put down. You know, when you think about it, a sheepdog is what I've been, because a sheepdog gathers his flock and guards it, doesn't he? And that's really been my job, to gather and guard the Lord's flock. And it all started so many years ago with 4 boys, lads, walking across the sands to the island of Lindisfarne to join the new monastery set up by Aidan and some of his monks from the holy island of Iona. There were 4 of us, Ced the eldest, Kylin, Sinabil, and me, Chad. I was the baby of the family. I was 12 at the time. I don't know what we expected to see about this grand new monastery, but what there was, in fact, was just a collection of wooden huts. A rather big hut for the church and another one for the dining hall, and then just little huts dotted round about, made out of what wood they could find, each hut holding 2 monks. And it was cold. I'll never forget the cold at Lindisfarne. Aidan himself came to welcome us and said that we were doubly valuable to him because we were farmers' sons and they wanted to start a farm there and be self-sufficient. And also we were local North Country lads. So when the time came for us to take the Lord's word out to the countryside, we would know the people and the way their minds worked. And Aidan said that our work would consist of 3 things. Worship, there were 8 services a day. Well, I say a day, the first one was at 2 o'clock in the morning. Even in the summer, when we went to the church, the stars were still out. 8 services. Our work was to help to build the monastery and to start the farm. And quite honestly, the lads that came over from Iona, they were grand lads, but they knew nothing about building and huts. And some of what they'd built was a bit shaky. So we had that to put right. And the third thing we had to do was study. Now, of course, none of us could read. And anyway, there were only 3 books at Lindisfarne. So what we had to do was to learn part of the Bible off by heart. It took me a year to learn off by heart the 150 Psalms. And then Aidan said, I want you to learn one of the Gospels. So I said, may I learn the Gospel of Mark, please? Anybody know why? Because it's the shortest. But Aidan said no, he wanted to learn the Gospel of John, so that's what I did. And after a while, they taught us to read and write, and as the months became years, it was like we'd known no other life. And we found ourselves tutors to young people that had come in since us. And then one day, Aidan sent for me and said, now, you were very young when you joined us, and you can't be ordained as a priest until you're 30. You've learnt most of what we can teach you. What I want you to do now is to go off to one of the big monasteries in Ireland and learn all that they have to teach you. Well, I didn't want to go. My brothers were there, my friends were there. The friendship at Lindisfarne was unbelievable because it was all new, it was exciting, we were doing the best job in the world that we could think of. But obedience is obedience, and so off to Ireland I went. There were 2 or 3 other monks going with us, and we walked across Britain to the west coast and then took a boat to Ireland. Now, I am not a good sailor. I'm terrified of the sea. Even just going out in a fishing boat from Lindisfarne was enough for me. When there was a storm at sea, I used to stand in front of the altar at Lindisfarne and pray for the sailors. But when we were going to Ireland, I tell you, I was praying for me. We got to Ireland and I walked. I walked to this big monastery about halfway down Ireland, and it had a funny name, Rathmel-Seagy it was called. And I'd never seen anything like it. For a start, it was big and all the buildings were stone. There were about 150 monks there, and it was the centre of a village of people employed by the monastery. The abbot, if you like, was their lord of the manor, and they were doing the work in the fields and the building and the maintenance, which left us monks free to do work directly connected with the monastery. And for me, this work was the making of books. Because, of course, books are written by hand, and if you want another copy of the same book, then you start all over again and copy it out by hand. Now, they taught me to read and write at Lindisfarne, but this was much more complicated. I had to start with the sheepskin and make the vellum on which I would write. I had to start with the goose quills and make the pens and the pigment and grind them to make the inks of various colours. And when all was ready, I had to copy very carefully the master manuscript. There could be no mistakes. And of course, because it was God's work, it had to be beautiful. And sometimes I spent as much as a day on one capital letter, outlining it in gold, and then filling it in with all the colours of the rainbow. We worked, we worshipped, we studied. Now, the library at Rathmel-Seagy was outstanding. There were thousands of books there. I couldn't get enough of them. Not only were there books of the Bible and books about the Bible, there were books by the church fathers, books of prayers, books of devotions. There were even books on astronomy and mathematics and literature and poetry. And I really couldn't get enough of them. In a way, I was happier there than I'd ever been, though I was to be happier yet in the future. News kept coming across from mainland Britain because there was always a little traffic of monks going one way or the other. And in the year I was ordained as a priest, when I was 30, I heard that my big brother, Said, had been appointed a bishop, and he was the bishop of the East Saxons down London way. And I know pride is a sin, but I was proud of him. I really was. We were always so very close. I don't know what the bond is between the eldest and the youngest brothers, but we just loved each other. We used to say that each knew what the other was thinking. And then came sad news that Aidan, my abbot at Lindisfarne, had died. I wish I could have met him again, but I know he had gone to a better place. And a few years later, I heard even better news that my eldest brother, Said, had been asked by the King of Northumbria to found a new monastery. And he chose a place just inland from Whitby on the east coast, a place called Lastingham. Now, Said liked a challenge, and Lastingham really was a challenge. It was bleak, it was miles from anywhere, it was wild, there were wolves, and there were people. And the people were so savage that they reckoned the wolves were afraid of them. And this was where Said set up his monastery, helped by my two other brothers, Kylin and Sinabil. Well, I wanted to be with them, of course. And I spoke to the abbot at Rathmelsigi, and he said, well, why don't you wait for the Lord to make his will known? Don't try and run your own life. God will do no worse by you if you turn over the guidance of his life to him. Wait, he said, until you're sent for. It seems to me that your three brothers are managing very well. So I waited for a few years longer and then took ship back to mainland Britain. And I worked on the west coast, far enough away from Lastingham not to be interfering, but really at the limit of what they could do. So where their effective patch ended, mine began. And then came the year 664. I remember there was an eclipse of the sun. Oh, the people round about were terrified. God is angry with us. He's taking away the sun. Well, of course, I'd read in all the books at Rathmelsigi that this thing happened from time to time. And so I said to them, don't be afraid. In a few hours, the sun will be back. Oh, Father Chad, pray for us, pray for us. And of course, the sun came back. And they said, a miracle. Father Chad has worked a miracle. Well, really, I mean, the miracles that Jesus worked were miracles indeed. But my sort of miracles, all it was knowing a little bit more than the people round about. I mean, this miracle of the heart that's supposed to have come back when I called. I knew it was coming back. It had got a thorn in the bushes. That's all it was. But oh, a miracle. Anyway, 664 was a year of turmoil. What had happened was that we Celtic priests had been working and converting and preaching down from the north of England. And meanwhile, priests from the Church of Rome, sent by Augustine, were working up from the south. So, of course, we met. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, that grown men in Christ's service meeting up with a similar band, would rejoice. They didn't. They argued, they fell out, they bickered. Nothing was right for them. They even argued about the way a monk should have his hair cut and his head shaved. They argued about how you should work out the date for Easter. In fact, it got ridiculous because the king, who was from the Celtic tradition, was celebrating Easter Sunday, while his queen, who was a Roman Christian, was still stuck on Good Friday. It was ridiculous. But of course, the argument wasn't really about that sort of thing. It was really about control. I mean, people are like that. Who's going to be the boss? Well, the king was never a patient man, and he lost his temper and he said, look, get together and get it sorted out. And he called a big conference at Whitby Abbey when the two sides came together. And the Church of Rome won, hands down. And we were told, we Celtic Christians, from here on, you are members of the Church of Rome, you do things the Romish way. Well, some of us didn't care one way or the other. It was still God's work. Some of us knuckled under, and some of us couldn't take it at all. The man that succeeded Aidan at Lindisfarne just walked out. But the strange thing was that at this big conference, the man that carried the day, he was eloquent, he was forceful, he was twice as bright as anybody else there, was a man who had trained at Lindisfarne with me, a chap called Wilfred. But when I'd gone to Ireland to study, Wilfred had gone to Paris, which of course is from the Church of Rome. So Wilfred was now Roman through and through. It was quite strange, that. Anyway, the conference ended, and everybody went home, and they took with them, most of them, the plague. And my brother said had been at Whitby, he'd been the interpreter. And he went back to Lastingham, a sick man. And he sent for me to take over from him. And I set off. And before I'd gone very far, I heard that my dear brother said had died. So I journeyed to Lastingham, and it was a terrible journey across the country because the plague was doing its worst. There were people grieving, there were people bewildered, there were people angry, and I did what I could for them. I read the burial service more times than I care to remember. I suppose in a way it was as well that I had lost my brother, because at least I was able to say to them, I know how it feels. I mourn with you. I weep with you. And when I finally got to Lastingham, it was a bitterly cold November. And the first thing I had to do was to read the service for the dead over my brother Said's grave. Those monks that had not died were ill. There was only one person, apart from myself, in the whole of the abbey who was well, and that was a little lad who'd come with some monks up from Essex. And he and I did what we could. We buried the dead, we nursed the living, and it got so bad that at one time only the little lad and I were well enough to go into the church to keep the 8 daily services. But things improved. Those monks that hadn't died recovered. And we then really had our work cut out because, of course, there were fewer of us and the much greater need out in the countryside because people were so bewildered and devastated by the plague. Meanwhile, Wilfrid, who'd done so well at the conference at Whitby, was appointed Bishop of Northumbria. He was obviously an up-and-coming lad, even though at times he was a silly lad, I have to say. And he said, I'm from the Church of Rome. Bishops can only be consecrated by other bishops. And there aren't any bishops from the Church of Rome in Britain. So I am going back to Paris to get myself properly consecrated. And off he went. Well, we expected him back in a couple of months. But 2 months went to 4, and then to 6, and there's no sign of Wilfrid. Now, I've said the king was not a patient man. And he lost his temper in the end and said, I don't know where Wilfrid is, I don't care. Chad, you are Bishop of Northumbria as of now. Well, I didn't want the job. It wasn't my sort of thing at all. There was too much administration. I wanted to be out among the people, preaching and teaching and helping. But when the king says, do it, you do it. And I made the best job of it I could. And after 2 years, back comes Wilfrid, bright as a button. Well, he's a brash lad, but even he, thick-skinned as he is, realised that he wasn't exactly in the king's best books. And so he went to Ripon and kept quietly out of the way and let me get on with being Bishop of Northumbria. But round about then, there was a new archbishop for all Britain sent from Rome, a man called Theodore. Well, there were all sorts of rumours about Theodore. Some people said he was black. Some people said he could only speak Latin. Some people said, and this was true, he came from the Bible lands. In fact, he came from the same city as St. Paul, Tarsus. Now, there's no place like a monastery for rumour. All right, we have this vow of silence, but for 1 hour in the evening where we all gather round the fire and warm ourselves before supper, then we talk, and we make up for the silence, believe me. And some of the rumours about Theodore were fantastic. They said he got a big beard. They said he walked in a strange way. But do you know, he turned out to be exactly the right man for the job. He had a long-term vision, and he brought the two sides together, and over the years made one church in the whole of Britain. If it needed patience, he was patient. If it needed firmness, he was firm. He was a great man. And so, by the time he got up Britain to Lastingham, then we had some respect for him. Well, he sent for me. And I thought, with any luck, he's going to ask me to hand back the Bishop of Northumbria to Wilfrid, and I can get on with looking after the monastery and teaching and preaching, which is what I want to do. Well, he hummed and he ha'd, and do you know, I was tempted to play the martyr, to say, if your grace wishes, I will obey in obedience. Oh, I was tempted because I thought, I could get in the bishop's good books. Anyway, I didn't. I'm afraid my North Country nature came to the top, and what I actually said was, I didn't ask for the job in the first place, and if Wilfrid's daft enough to want it, he can have it. Well, I don't think anybody had spoken to the Archbishop like that. And when I saw his chaplain's face, I thought, that's torn it. But do you know, he laughed. And when he stopped laughing, he said, very well, back to Lastingham, Wilfrid will be Bishop of Northumbria, but don't expect to be at Lastingham long, because honest men are scarce. So I went back to being abbot at Lastingham, and then I started to hear rumours. Rumours that the King of Northumbria was talking to Wilfrid, who of course was now my boss, who was talking to Archbishop Theodore, who was talking to the King of Mercia. And the next I knew, I'd been appointed Bishop of Mercia with Lindsey and Middle Anglia. Well, that meant that my diocese was enormous, because it stretched from the Humber on one side of Britain right down and across to the Severn on the other. Unfortunately, although Mercia was pagan, there were little outposts, little monasteries with priests that I could rely on and draw on. Where are you going to base yourself, they said. Well, I decided that I would base myself at Lichfield. Lichfield was one of the few Christian towns in Mercia. It had a long history of Christianity. In fact, there were people who had been martyred at Lichfield. There was a church there, and on the more practical side, it was where two big Roman roads met. So I set off for Mercia. I'd never been that far south. Now, I dealt with pagans before, of course I had, because that was my job. But the pagans I dealt with were Celtic pagans. Now, Celtic paganism is really nature worship. They believed that there were spirits in the trees, in the water, in the rocks, in the flowers, in everything. And of course, for me, it wasn't a sort of universe leap to say, yes, of course there are. There are spirits in everything. And all those spirits are different aspects of the one true God, who created everything, so he is in everything. It makes sense. He is in that tree, that lake. He is in me. He is in you. But the Anglo-Saxon pagans were really something else. It made my blood run cold. I could have wept for them. They'd found these foreign gods from Lord knows where, Wotan and Thor, who could only be appeased by blood sacrifice, preferably human. They were pitiless. They didn't love anybody. They were just inflicting fate on the poor Anglo-Saxons, or so they believed. They had no concept of a life after death. When you're dead, you say, they're dead. And that was it for them. The only things they had in the way of love and comfort were, first of all, their family, if they had one, and second, their mates, the people they worked with for whoever Lord they served. And if they fell out with the Lord, or the Lord dismissed them, or their family died, or they hadn't got a family, then they were out in the cold, unloved, unwanted, masterless men. One of them said, "Our life is like a sparrow flying through the cold night that flies into a hall where there's a banquet and everything is fire and warmth and light and music and comfort and joy. And then the sparrow flies out through another window, out into the cold and the rain and the darkness, and that is our life." And quite frequently, they would kill themselves. There's no hope for us, nothing to look forward to. They would kill themselves. They called it going to Wotan. Well, what a challenge. I loved these people, I really did. And one by one, I brought to them, I and my team of monks and priests, the knowledge and love of God. And it was the most joyous time, the most rewarding time, the happiest time of all my life. We went all over Mercia. We ate whatever was given to us or not. We slept wherever we were, sometimes in a rich man's house, sometimes under a wet hedge, but always traveling, always preaching, encouraging, blessing, converting, praying, always. And then I found that I was getting tired, far more tired than I should have been. And I couldn't journey as far. And I became lame. And really, since Christmas, I haven't been able to do anything. I've just been in the church and in my cell. And do you know, it doesn't matter, because the work of the monastery, the work of the gospel, God's work, is now going on perfectly well without me. I've lit the flame, and the flame burns steadily, and I can take my leave. It is growing very dark in here. I can see you as dim shapes, and I can see the light from the window. And very soon now I must take my leave of you. Remember me or not, as you wish. But please, I beg of you, remember this, that the greatest thing in the world is not whether we have God in our hearts, important though that is. The greatest and most precious thing in the world is that no matter who we are, or what our beliefs, or what we have done, or what we may do in the future, good or bad, no matter all those things, every one of us is in the heart of God. As said my brother. I don't need that now.